Under the Pentagon sits a windowless room. In it is a filing cabinet. It says "Top Secret" on it. Inside are 17,000 pages. The United States Air Force never wanted you to see these papers. These papers tell stories. They are about objects that broke the laws of physics. They tell about pilots who saw impossible things in the sky. They have radar data. Military officials spent decades trying to explain this data away. For 20 years, Operation Blue Book was America's official UFO investigation. The program promised answers. It promised honest analysis of strange things in the sky. But recently released documents tell a different story. They show officials trying to silence witnesses. They show how officials hid evidence. They kept the public in the dark. Captain Edward Ruppelt took charge of this program. He did not know it would become the largest government study of UFOs in American history. For 17 years, from 1952 to 1969, Operation Blue Book looked at over 12,000 UFO sightings. These came from across the United States. The program promised openness and real science. But behind closed doors, a different story was playing out. Operation Blue Book goes back to the summer of 1947. Civilian pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 mysterious objects. They were flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state. Arnold said they moved like a saucer skipping across water. He created the term flying saucer. This term captured the public's interest for decades. Within weeks, reports of similar sightings came from across the country. The most famous happened at Roswell. The Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release. They said they had recovered a flying disc from a ranch in New Mexico. The military quickly took back the statement. They claimed it was just a weather balloon. But the incident sparked UFO fever across the nation. The U.S. Air Force found itself in an awkward position. Public interest in UFOs was growing fast. Military officials worried. They thought all the excitement might interfere with national security operations. Soviet aircraft could use the confusion as cover. They could hide their spy missions behind UFO reports over American territory. The Air Force created Project Sign in 1948. This was followed by Project Grudge in 1949. Both programs were supposed to investigate UFO reports, but they had small budgets. They had poor leadership. Many in the military saw them as public relations exercises. These were designed to calm civilian fears. Everything changed in 1951. Captain Edward Ruppelt took charge. He renamed it Project Blue Book. Unlike his predecessors, Ruppelt approached the UFO problem with real scientific curiosity. He set up standard reporting procedures. He created a system for classifying different types of sightings. He recruited qualified scientists to help. Ruppelt's team developed a step-by-step approach. They examined weather conditions. They looked at aircraft traffic. They checked space events. They looked for other explanations for each reported sighting. Cases were labeled identified if a normal explanation could be found, or unidentified if no good answer emerged. The program operated out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This was in Dayton, Ohio. Investigators kept files on every reported UFO encounter. They interviewed witnesses. They studied photographs. They talked with experts. These experts came from weather science to psychology. The goal was to find out if UFOs posed any threat to national security. But from the beginning, Operation Blue Book faced problems. The program publicly promoted scientific investigation, but many of its conclusions seemed decided beforehand. Investigators were under pressure to explain away sightings. They often offered explanations that witnesses found weak or insulting. Dr. J. Allen Hynek was an astronomer. He worked as Blue Book's scientific consultant for over 20 years. He later admitted that the program had a basic bias. The attitude was that all UFO reports could be explained, Hynek said. He said this in interviews after leaving the project. The goal wasn't to investigate, but to debunk. This tension became clear in some of Blue Book's most controversial cases. In 1952, radar operators at Washington National Airport tracked multiple unidentified objects. These were flying over the nation's capital. The objects appeared on radar screens for several hours. They moved at impossible speeds. They made sudden direction changes. This defied known aircraft abilities. Air traffic controllers watched the objects on their screens. Fighter jets scrambled to intercept them. Pilots reported seeing lights that matched the radar contacts, but the objects vanished whenever aircraft got close. The incident made national headlines. It prompted a packed press conference at the Pentagon. Major General John Samford was the Air Force's Director of Intelligence. He explained the sightings as temperature inversions. These created false radar returns. The press and public largely accepted this explanation. But many radar operators remained unconvinced. They had decades of experience with weather patterns. They insisted the contacts showed characteristics unlike anything they had seen before. The radar operators weren't rookies. They weren't easily fooled. Senior air traffic controller Harry Barnes had worked the Washington National Airport Tower for over 15 years. He knew every type of weather pattern. He knew which ones could create false radar returns. On that July night, Barnes watched objects appear on his scope. They moved in ways no weather could explain. These were solid returns, Barnes later told investigators. They moved with purpose, not randomly like weather effects. When our jets approached, the objects would speed away. They went at speeds we'd never recorded before. Barnes wasn't alone. At nearby Andrews Air Force Base, radar operator Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport tracked the same objects. He used military equipment. Both civilian and military radar systems showed identical readings. This ruled out equipment problems. The objects weren't just electronic blips on screens. Multiple witnesses saw visual confirmation of the radar contacts. Commercial pilot Casey Pierman was approaching Washington National. He spotted several bright lights. They were moving in formation below his aircraft. When he radioed the tower, controllers confirmed they were tracking the same objects on radar. Air Force Captain William Patterson was scrambled in an F-94 interceptor to investigate. As he closed in on the objects, Patterson reported seeing 4 bright lights. They were arranged in a loose formation. When he tried to pursue them, the lights sped away. He described this as impossible speed. The encounter lasted over 6 hours. Dozens of witnesses saw it. They saw it both on the ground and in the air. Yet the official explanation dismissed all of these stories. It favored a weather theory that many experts found weak. Similar patterns emerged in other high-profile cases. This happened throughout the 1950s. The Leveland UFO incident of 1957 involved multiple witnesses across Texas. They reported encounters with a glowing object. It interfered with car engines. Over 2 hours, 15 separate witnesses called police. They reported their vehicles stalling. This happened when approached by a bright, egg-shaped craft. Sheriff Weir Clem initially dismissed the first few calls. He thought they were pranks or drunk driving incidents, but more reports came in from different locations. These covered a 40-mile stretch of highway. He began to take them seriously. The witnesses didn't know each other. They were calling from towns miles apart, yet their descriptions were remarkably similar. Jim Wheeler was a volunteer fire chief. He was driving near Leveland. He saw a bright light ahead on the road. As he got closer, his truck's engine died. The headlights went out. Wheeler coasted to a stop. He saw a torpedo-shaped object. It was about 200 feet long. It was hovering just above the highway. The object glowed. Wheeler described it as the brightness of a neon sign. After about 3 minutes, the craft rose silently into the sky. It disappeared. As soon as it left, Wheeler's truck started normally. He drove straight to the sheriff's office. He reported what he'd seen. He became one of several witnesses who would give similar accounts that night. Blue Book investigators arrived in Leveland several days after the incident. They interviewed a few witnesses. They examined the locations where the sightings occurred. Their final report said all the encounters were ball lightning. This was despite the fact that weather conditions that night were clear and dry. The ball lightning explanation troubled many weather experts. Dr. James McDonald was a weather scientist at the University of Arizona. He later studied the Leveland case. He found the weather theory highly unlikely. Ball lightning is extremely rare. It typically lasts only seconds. It doesn't last the several minutes reported by witnesses. It also doesn't explain the effects on vehicle engines. But the Blue Book pattern was becoming clear. No matter how credible the witnesses, investigators seemed determined to find conventional explanations. No matter how unusual the circumstances, they did the same. The program's credibility began to suffer. Witnesses felt their stories were being dismissed or ridiculed. In 1964, police officer Lonnie Zamora reported encountering a landed UFO. This was near Socorro, New Mexico. Zamora was patrolling Highway 85. He heard a loud roar. He saw flames in the distance. He thought a local dynamite shack might have exploded. He drove toward the commotion to investigate. He crested a small hill. Zamora saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In a small valley below the road sat an egg-shaped craft. It was about the size of a car. Standing beside it were two figures in white coveralls. The beings appeared to be human-sized. They were examining the underside of their vehicle. Zamora stopped his patrol car. He got out for a better look. As soon as the figures noticed him, they quickly moved around to the far side of the craft. Seconds later, the object began making a loud roar. Bright blue flame shot from its underside. The craft rose slowly at first. Then it sped up rapidly. It flew away toward the southwest. Zamora ran back to his patrol car. He radioed for backup. His voice was shaking. He tried to describe what he'd witnessed. Sergeant Sam Chavez arrived within minutes. He found Zamora visibly shaken. They examined the landing site together. They discovered 4 deep impressions in the hard-packed earth. These could have been where landing pads rested. Greasewood bushes in the area were burned. They were still smoking. The sand showed signs of intense heat. Blue Book investigators arrived within hours. They conducted a thorough examination of the site. Major Hector Quintanilla led the investigation team. They brought special equipment. This was to analyze the physical traces left behind. The investigators found the physical evidence compelling. The landing pad impressions were arranged in a precise geometric pattern. Each depression showed the same depth and characteristics. Soil samples revealed unusual mineral changes. These were consistent with exposure to extreme heat. The burned vegetation showed a pattern. This suggested a single heat source from above. Most importantly, investigators could find no evidence of a hoax. Zamora had an excellent reputation as a police officer. He had no history of seeking publicity. He had no history of making false reports. The timing of his radio call matched his account perfectly. There was no way he could have created the physical evidence so quickly. Dr. Hynek investigated the Socorro case personally. He later called it one of the most credible UFO encounters. He had examined it during his time with Blue Book. The case was officially classified as unidentified. This made it one of the few unexplained cases in Blue Book's files. Yet even this clear-cut incident faced attempts at conventional explanation. Some suggested Zamora had seen a lunar landing module being tested in the area, but no such tests were scheduled. Others proposed elaborate hoax scenarios. This was despite the lack of any evidence supporting fraud theories. The Socorro incident highlighted the growing frustration within Operation Blue Book. Investigators like Hynek wanted to acknowledge genuinely puzzling cases. Air Force officials preferred explanations that didn't leave questions unanswered. The tension between scientific honesty and military preferences would only grow worse over time. As the years passed, tensions within Operation Blue Book got worse. Scientists like Hynek grew frustrated. The program was reluctant to acknowledge genuinely puzzling cases. Meanwhile, Air Force officials worried about admitting uncertainty about UFOs. They thought it might damage public confidence in military capabilities. The situation came to a head in 1966. A series of UFO sightings in Michigan captured national attention. Witnesses near Ann Arbor reported seeing glowing objects. These were hovering over swampy areas for several nights. The sightings involved multiple independent witnesses. These included police officers and college students. Frank Manor was a farmer. He lived near Dexter, Michigan. He was one of the first to report the strange lights. On the evening of the 20th of March, Manor and his teenage son Ronald were returning from town. They saw a glowing object in the swamp behind their house. It was kind of a yellowish light, Manor told reporters. It would get bright, then dim, then bright again. It seemed to be sitting right on the ground in the swamp. The Manors called police. Officers arrived to find the object still visible in the distance. Deputy Stanley McFadden confirmed seeing the light through binoculars. He described it as having a reddish glow that pulsed regularly. Similar sightings occurred the following night near Hillsdale College. Over 80 students and staff members watched glowing objects. They hovered over a swampy area for several hours. The witnesses included the college dean and several faculty members. This lent credibility to the reports. Local authorities called in Blue Book investigators. Hynek arrived to examine the evidence. He was under pressure from Air Force superiors. They wanted a quick explanation. Hynek held a press conference. He suggested the lights might be swamp gas. This was caused by rotting organic matter. The explanation satisfied military officials, but it outraged witnesses and the local media. The college dean publicly disputed Hynek's theory. He pointed out that the objects showed intelligent movement. They remained visible far longer than any gas emission could persist. "We watched these things for over 4 hours," said Dean Robert Lee. "They moved in formation. They changed colors. They responded to our flashlight signals. That's not swamp gas behavior." Critics accused Blue Book of offering ridiculous explanations. They said this was to avoid addressing the real mystery. The swamp gas controversy marked a turning point. It changed public perception of Operation Blue Book. What had once been viewed as a serious scientific investigation now appeared to be a cover-up operation. It was designed to discredit UFO witnesses. Congressional representatives began calling for independent reviews. They wanted reviews of the program's methods and conclusions. Representative Gerald Ford's district included the Michigan sighting areas. He demanded hearings on the Air Force's handling of UFO investigations. The pressure led to some fascinating revelations about Blue Book's internal operations. Former investigators began speaking privately. They talked about the challenges they faced when trying to conduct honest research. They described a culture where finding conventional explanations was more important than finding accurate ones. Captain Kevin Randall worked on several Blue Book investigations. He later revealed that investigators sometimes felt pressured to close cases quickly. This was regardless of whether the evidence supported their conclusions. "The goal wasn't truth," Randall said in later interviews. "The goal was eliminating public concern about UFOs." This pressure became most apparent in cases involving military witnesses. When Air Force personnel reported UFO encounters, their stories often received different treatment than civilian reports. Military witnesses faced potential career consequences. This was for making reports that couldn't be easily explained away. One such case involved Captain Larry Coyne. He was a helicopter pilot with the Ohio Army National Guard. In October 1973, Coyne was flying a UH-1 helicopter with 3 crew members. They encountered something that defied explanation. The crew first noticed a bright red light approaching from the east. Initially thinking it might be another aircraft, Coyne tried to radio for identification. He received no response. The object appeared to be on a collision course with their helicopter. Coyne put the helicopter into a steep dive to avoid impact, but the object seemed to follow their movement. As it got closer, the crew could see it was a metallic craft. It was about 60 feet long. It had a distinct dome on top. Red and green lights pulsed along its hull. The object stopped directly above their helicopter. It hovered there for several minutes. During this time, the crew noticed their radio communications were completely jammed. More mysteriously, their helicopter began climbing. This was despite Coyne's attempts to maintain level flight. "I had the collective full down," Coyne later testified. "The helicopter was in a climbing attitude that I could not control. Something was pulling us up." The object eventually sped away toward the west. Normal helicopter control returned immediately. When they landed, Coyne and his crew filed detailed reports of the incident. These included precise timing and technical details about their aircraft's behavior. The case attracted significant attention. This was because it involved experienced military pilots with excellent reputations. The crew had decades of combined flight experience. They were trained observers of aerial things. Their testimony was consistent. It was supported by recorded flight data. Yet, Blue Book's investigation of the Coyne incident was notably brief. The final report said the sighting was a meteor. It suggested the helicopter's unusual climb was due to pilot error under stress. The explanation satisfied no one familiar with the details of the case. Coyne himself rejected the meteor theory. He pointed out that meteors don't hover or change direction. The pilot error explanation was equally problematic. Coyne had extensive experience. 3 other crew members witnessed the same events. Cases like these revealed a pattern. This was in Blue Book's approach to military UFO encounters. When servicemen reported incidents that couldn't be easily dismissed, their stories often received skeptical treatment. This bordered on character assassination. The message was clear: military careers could suffer from making inconvenient UFO reports. This selective skepticism extended to cases involving nuclear weapons facilities. Throughout the 1960s, security personnel at various nuclear missile sites reported UFO incidents. But these encounters rarely appeared in Blue Book files. The omissions suggested that the most sensitive UFO cases were being handled through different, more classified channels. Former missile launch officer Robert Salas later revealed details about one such incident. This happened at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. According to Salas, on the morning of the 24th of March, 1967, security guards reported glowing objects. They were hovering over the base's nuclear missile silos. Salas was underground in a launch control facility. He received a call from the security team above. The guard reported that several bright red objects were moving silently over the missile fields. As they watched, the objects seemed to focus on individual missile silos. Within minutes of the UFO report, alarm indicators in the launch control facility began lighting up. 10 nuclear missiles under Salas's command suddenly went offline. Their guidance systems failed at the same time. The missiles were rendered completely unable to work. "These were our most advanced nuclear weapons," Salas later explained. "They had multiple backup systems and redundant safeguards. For all 10 to fail at once was virtually impossible through normal technical problems." Similar incidents allegedly occurred at other nuclear facilities during the same time period, but none were included in Blue Book's official database. The exclusion of military UFO encounters from Blue Book's files raised serious questions. Questions about the program's completeness and openness. If the Air Force was genuinely interested in investigating all UFO reports, why were incidents involving nuclear weapons kept separate? Critics suggested that the most significant cases were being handled through different, more classified programs. These operated outside public oversight. Dr. Hynek's growing disappointment with Operation Blue Book became public in the late 1960s. He began speaking openly about cases he considered genuinely unexplained. He criticized the program's methods in academic journals. His transformation from skeptical scientist to UFO advocate added credibility. It supported claims that Blue Book was suppressing important evidence. In 1968, Hynek wrote a landmark paper for the journal Playboy. He outlined his concerns about Blue Book's scientific methods. He argued that the program's approach was fundamentally flawed. It began with the assumption that all UFO reports must have conventional explanations. Science is not served by refusing to investigate things simply because they don't fit current theories, Hynek wrote. The history of science is filled with discoveries that initially seemed impossible or ridiculous. Hynek's criticisms gained support from other scientists who had worked with Blue Book. Dr. James McDonald was the weather scientist who had studied the Leveland case. He began conducting his own independent UFO research. McDonald's findings often contradicted Blue Book's conclusions. This was particularly true in cases involving multiple witnesses and physical evidence. The scientific community's growing skepticism of Blue Book coincided with increasing congressional pressure for independent oversight. Representative J. Edward Roosh of Indiana called for hearings. He wanted to examine the Air Force's handling of UFO investigations. He argued that the public deserved honest answers about unexplained aerial things. In response to growing criticism, the Air Force commissioned the University of Colorado to conduct an independent study of UFO things. The Colorado project was led by physicist Dr. Edward Condon. It was supposed to provide an objective scientific assessment of the UFO question. However, internal memos surfaced years later. These revealed that Condon had decided the study's conclusions before the investigation began. In a letter to project administrators, he wrote that the study should focus on training graduate students. He said this rather than seriously examining UFO evidence. The predetermined outcome cast doubt on the entire scientific review process. The Condon Committee spent 2 years examining selected UFO cases. This included some from Blue Book's files. Despite finding several cases that remained unexplained, the committee's final report concluded that further UFO study was unlikely to yield scientific benefits. The report's conclusions were controversial even within the scientific community. Several committee members disagreed with Condon's assessment. They argued that the unexplained cases deserved continued investigation. Dr. Blance, Roy Craig was one of the project's principal investigators. He later expressed regret about the study's dismissive tone toward credible witnesses. Meanwhile, Operation Blue Book continued receiving reports from military personnel. These people encountered unexplained aerial things, but the program's resources and authority were clearly declining. By the late 1960s, Blue Book was operating with a skeleton staff and minimal budget. The program's final director was Major Hector Quintanilla. He found himself in an impossible position. Military superiors wanted no cases left unexplained. Meanwhile, witnesses demanded honest investigation of genuinely puzzling encounters. The contradiction made effective investigation nearly impossible. Quintanilla later admitted that Blue Book investigators sometimes felt like they were fighting a losing battle. "We were expected to explain everything," he said in post-retirement interviews, but some cases simply couldn't be explained with current knowledge. The program's declining influence became apparent in its handling of high-profile cases during its final years. When multiple witnesses reported UFO sightings, Blue Book investigations were often quick and shallow. They provided explanations that satisfied neither the witnesses nor independent researchers. One of the last significant cases Blue Book investigated involved the 1967 Shag Harbor incident in Nova Scotia, Canada. Although the case occurred outside U.S. territory, American military personnel were involved in the investigation. This was due to NORAD cooperation agreements. Multiple witnesses, including Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers, reported seeing a large glowing object crash into Shag Harbor. The object was described as about 60 feet across, with 4 bright lights. Witnesses heard no engine sounds as it descended toward the water. The crash created a bright yellow foam on the water's surface. It persisted for hours. Coast Guard vessels rushed to the scene expecting to find aircraft wreckage, but no conventional debris was recovered. Divers later reported finding unusual markings on the ocean floor. Blue Book's investigation of the Shag Harbor case was minimal. This was despite the involvement of multiple government agencies and trained observers. The final report classified the incident as unexplained, but no follow-up investigation was conducted. By 1969, Operation Blue Book had lost most of its credibility with both the public and the scientific community. The Condon Committee's report provided the Air Force with the justification it needed to shut down the program. This allowed them to avoid appearing to ignore the UFO question entirely. On the 17th of December, 1969, the Air Force officially ended Operation Blue Book. Secretary of the Air Force Robert Seamans announced that the program had investigated 12,618 UFO reports over 17 years. Of these, 701 cases remained officially unidentified. The closure statement emphasized that Blue Book had found no evidence that UFOs posed a threat to national security. It found no evidence that they represented alien technology. The Air Force claimed it would no longer investigate UFO reports. This was, unless they appeared to threaten American military installations or airspace. But the end of Operation Blue Book did not end government interest in UFO things. Declassified documents released decades later revealed that other military agencies continued investigating unexplained aerial encounters. They did this through different programs. The Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the Navy all maintained their own UFO files. These were often classified at much higher levels than Blue Book materials. The revelation of continued government UFO research came gradually. This happened through Freedom of Information Act releases and whistleblower testimonies. In 1977, the CIA released thousands of pages of UFO-related documents. These revealed the agency's deep involvement in UFO investigations throughout the Blue Book era. One particularly intriguing CIA document described a 1952 meeting. Officials discussed using UFO reports for psychological warfare purposes. The memo suggested that enemy nations might exploit American UFO fears to create panic. They could undermine public confidence in government institutions. The document revealed that the CIA's interest in UFOs wasn't primarily scientific, but strategic. Agency officials were less concerned about whether UFOs represented alien visitors. They cared more about how UFO beliefs might affect national security and public morale. Former Blue Book investigators began speaking more openly about their experiences after the program ended. Major Hector Quintanilla, who directed Blue Book during its final years, later admitted that the program faced constant pressure. They had to explain away sightings. This was regardless of the evidence. We were caught between military superiors who wanted no unexplained cases and witnesses who demanded honest investigation, Quintanilla revealed. The pressure to find conventional explanations was intense, even when the evidence didn't support them. Captain Edward Ruppelt was the program's most respected director. He wrote a book about his Blue Book experiences in 1956. While still employed by the Air Force, he described the program as a legitimate scientific investigation. However, in a revised edition published after his military retirement, Ruppelt added a final chapter. It suggested that important UFO evidence had been withheld from public view. These revelations fueled speculation that Operation Blue Book had been designed as a public relations exercise rather than a genuine investigation. Critics argued that the program's real purpose was to create the appearance of official UFO study. In reality, it was actually discouraging serious research into the phenomenon. The most damaging accusations came from former Blue Book personnel. They claimed they were ordered to debunk UFO reports. They had to use any available explanation, no matter how unlikely. They described a culture where admitting uncertainty about a UFO case was considered career damaging. This created powerful incentives to find conventional explanations for even the most puzzling encounters. Dr. Hynek's post-Blue Book writings provided the most detailed critique of the program's methods. He argued that the Air Force's approach was fundamentally unscientific. It began with the assumption that all UFO reports must have conventional explanations. This bias, he claimed, prevented investigators from recognizing patterns. These patterns might indicate genuine unknown things. In his 1972 book, The UFO Experience, Hynek proposed a new classification system for UFO encounters. This went far beyond Blue Book's simple categories. His system acknowledged that some sightings might represent genuinely unknown things worthy of serious scientific study. Hynek's transformation from government skeptic to UFO researcher inspired other scientists. They took a fresh look at unexplained aerial things. His credibility as a former Blue Book consultant lent weight to arguments that the official investigation had been inadequate. In the decades since Blue Book's closure, military personnel have continued reporting UFO encounters. Many of these incidents involve highly trained observers using sophisticated equipment. This lends credibility to their testimonies. Yet without an official investigation program, these reports often remain unexamined by scientific authorities. The 2017 revelation of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program demonstrated that the Pentagon had continued studying UFOs long after Blue Book ended. Videos released by the Navy showed military pilots encountering objects. These displayed flight characteristics far beyond known aircraft capabilities. These recent disclosures have renewed interest in Operation Blue Book's legacy. They have raised questions about what other UFO evidence might remain classified. Congressional hearings in 2022 revealed that military agencies have identified hundreds of unexplained aerial things in recent years. This suggests the UFO mystery is far from resolved. Former government officials who worked on classified UFO programs have hinted that some of the most compelling evidence remains hidden from public view. They describe encounters with objects that demonstrated technologies decades ahead of human capabilities. These were incidents that were deemed too sensitive for inclusion in programs like Blue Book. Luis Elizondo was the former director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. He has stated publicly that some UFO cases involve technologies not of this world. While stopping short of claiming alien origin, Elizondo's comments suggest that unknown aerial things continue to challenge conventional understanding. The truth about Operation Blue Book may never be fully known. After more than 50 years, many of the program's key participants have died. They took their secrets with them. Important documents may have been destroyed or remain buried in classified archives. These are inaccessible to researchers and historians. What seems clear is that Blue Book represented both the promise and failure of government UFO investigation. The program demonstrated that military agencies could conduct systematic studies of unexplained things when properly motivated and resourced. Yet it also revealed how institutional biases and political pressures could compromise scientific objectivity. The 701 cases that Blue Book never explained continue to intrigue researchers and the public. These files contain accounts of objects that appeared to violate known laws of physics. They were encountered by credible witnesses under clear conditions. Whatever these people saw remains unexplained by conventional science or military technology. Recent developments in UFO disclosure have validated many of the criticisms leveled at Operation Blue Book during its existence. The program's tendency to dismiss credible witnesses and ignore compelling evidence now appears even more problematic. This is in light of current military acknowledgement of unexplained aerial things. As new UFO evidence emerges from government sources, Operation Blue Book serves as a reminder. It shows how much we still don't know about the skies above us. The program's promise of openness was never fully realized. This left questions that may persist for generations to come. The files remain open. They are waiting for someone brave enough to ask what our government really knows about the mystery that has haunted our skies for over 7 decades. What do you think Operation Blue Book was really hiding? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into the mysteries that governments would prefer to keep secret.